In the popular film The Shawshank Redemption, the character named Red, played by Morgan Freeman, has been in prison for most of his life for a crime he committed when he was a young man. For the last 40 years, Red shares how he's gone many times before a parole board to seek his freedom and has failed. However, in his final parole hearing, he stops playing the game of trying to find the right words that will convince the board he's been rehabilitated. Instead, he speaks his mind.
He finally wins parole only when he breaks the conventions of trying to say how remorseful and rehabilitated he is. And he truly is. We know from the movie that he's completely rehabilitated. He's completely remorseful. He deserves to be free. He would be a benefit to society. But there is this way that it really does show the scene, shows the problems in parole and the promise. That the idea that he can only talk his freedom, as if it's 1,001 nights or something, that he can only try to say some words that would get through to you. It truly is an opportunity, a connection. But why would those words and why would, the tired conventions of saying, no, I promise you I'm reformed, that the parole board, you hear that they've been hearing these words from everyone. They don't have truth serum. They don't know what's real or what's not.
That's Ben Austin, journalist and author of Correction, Parole, Prison, and the Possibility of Change. He says oftentimes parole boards consist of former prosecutors and police officers who hold a pre-existing bias against prisoners. This panel must determine if the person before them is sincere about their rehabilitation and should be released early. Many experts argue that this process is extremely subjective, and the process should instead be based on policies that ensure consistency and fairness. In his book, Austin follows the lives of two prisoners, Johnny Veal and Michael Henderson. Both were sentenced as young men to over 100 years in prison for murder. Veal, who was finally released in his 60s after serving 50 years, had watched The Shawshank Redemption while in prison. He says that the parole board hearing in the movie was realistic, except for one important detail.
Johnny Veal said that, he was moved by it, but he also said that he never felt like he had the liberty to speak as freely as Morgan Freeman does, Red does in that scene of just saying, screw all of you. I'm just going to say, this is what he says, basically. He said that he never felt like he could do that because his fate, his life was in the balance. He had to sort of play the game and, work in every way to try to convince the board in some way that he was a safe bet, that he should be returned to the free world.
In every aspect, Veal was a model inmate for rehabilitation, but was repeatedly denied parole decade after decade.
He was running programs for people. He was music programs. He was tutoring people. During the pandemic, he was an ambassador to try to get people to get vaccinated. I mean, the warden wrote about him, just like how much he benefited the prison. But that was true for the last 20 years as well. And sadly, I think what freed him is just timing, just politics. That I think he was released in this short period of time after the murder of George Floyd and during the pandemic and before the midterm elections of 2020. And I think if he probably had a hearing 3 months later, he would still be in prison.
Go back to the mid-1800s, and there was no such thing as parole. A judge simply guessed how many years it would take for a criminal to be rehabilitated and sentenced him or her accordingly. Then, in 1870, the superintendent of Detroit's city jail, a man named Zebulon Brockway, argued that a judge predetermining when a person would be rehabilitated made about as much sense as a doctor prescribing surgery for a patient they'd never examined. Brockway's reforms of the penal code eventually led to the formal adoption of the federal parole system in 1910.
There was this idea that prisons were supposed to do more than just incapacitate people, take away their liberty, that they were supposed to do something to help them when they return to society be better citizens. So a notion of rehabilitation. And so the thinking was that, a judge at trial couldn't know when someone would be rehabilitated. A judge at trial couldn't tell the future. So why should you give that person the authority to say, in 7 years, you'll be ready to return to society? Rather, give them a range of years. Say, between 3 and 20 years, you're going to be incarcerated. And at the 3 year mark, you'll meet with a group that will assess you and to see whether you've addressed the problems that got you sent to prison in the first place.
Jump forward to today, and this system is still in place, but remains largely unchanged. Austin points to Wyoming as one of the few states that has created more of an objective, transparent process for granting parole.
Wyoming, of all states, and maybe because it's much more homogenous and much smaller, informs people when they enter prison exactly what they must do to earn parole. Very few states do that. Very few states give you a sort of guideline or even details. It's sort of a mystery to people in prison. And it's left up to often to volunteers or to prison lawyers, people who are incarcerated who take on this role to pass on any information or misinformation that they might have about how you earn parole. They end up becoming like Red inside the Shawshank Redemption. You're just trying to figure it out as you go along.
Currently, there are 1.2 million Americans behind bars and close to 2.5 million on probation or parole, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. This number is unmatched by any other country in the world. In addition, 5-year data from the BJS showed that between 2012 and 2017, 7 out of 10 prisoners released across 34 states were rearrested within 5 years. These alarming rates reveal a larger failure of our current system's power to rehabilitate during incarceration. And even if a prisoner has made the changes it takes to be granted parole, do they have the right resources to maintain that change and successfully integrate back into society? Austin believes that the U.S. should learn from Western European countries, who take a much different approach to incarceration.
From day one, you're looking at ways to reintegrate people. Prisons are built on a system of normality, meaning they should be as much like the outside world as possible because you want people to return to the outside world and thrive there. So it doesn't make sense to them to deny them so much, which is just creates this terrible cycle that we have here of even people who do get out on parole, we deny them so much in terms of the necessities of life that we cycle them back through the prison system over and over again.
To learn more about our guest, Ben Austin, and this topic, head to viewpointsradio.org. Also, check out his book, Correction, Parole, Prison, and the Possibility of Change, available now online and in select bookstores. For more behind the scenes and to follow our producers, search Viewpoints Radio on Instagram, X, and Facebook. The segment was written and produced by Polly Hansen. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson. Coming up next week.
The sunlight gets weird. You can feel things changing. The birds are going crazy.
The rare cosmic event coming up soon that you don't want to miss. Then,
to think that Russian athletes are held to the same standard as other athletes is incredibly naive and frankly foolish.
Russia's long history of cheating at the Olympic Games. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.